This is Badge of Honour with Alan Curry. Once again, I appear to be talking about my role as a police officer. Recently, I took you up to the rank of Sergeant and I explained the rank structure. I'm now being promoted to the rank of Inspector and in charge of 20 officers in the West End of Newcastle upon Tyne, which is England, a very cosmopolitan area, but the skills required personally and professionally now change as you have responsibility for over 20 officers on a 24-hour basis when you're dealing with people who require your help. And sometimes we're working with young officers, older officers, but in that context, they are dealing with some significant issues. Beforehand, I was looking after myself. Now I'm looking after others. And we had some incidents which were very difficult. Sadly, people do seem to hit each other on a regular basis. We had an incident where somebody attacked another individual with a machete. The arm was severed, blood everywhere, and two young officers dealt with that professionally as an initially with the incident. But then, of course, once we deal with it afterwards, they also have their own personal issues to deal with. We had another incident with a chase with a car, would you believe, where a stolen car actually knocked over a pedestrian and killed them. Can you imagine the issues surrounding the problems that the officers have to deal with, both with securing the scene, managing the situation with a dead body, and then having to deal with the grief of the families afterwards? And all those sort of situations are accepted as a norm for police officers. And they deal with them and they're very professional, but then who looks after the professionals? And then sometimes that's where the rank and role of inspector comes in, not least of which managing the scene, but also managing your staff. And that's where you get the situation where leadership, management, and dare I say counselling skills come in. Now, I've done some courses that help, but in the meantime, it's a lot to do with the individual, the personality, and how you lead your team and how your team both knows how to be professional, knows how to respect the role, but also knows they can have the support, understanding, and dare I say, even learning from some of the most significant and serious incidents that occur in the role of a police officer. We had another situation where it was raining very heavily and two officers were just driving past a block of flats. And would you believe the top flat was on fire? They ran into this burning building to carry an individual out because in the worst possible scenario, not only was the fire, the individual who owned that flat was incapacitated and unable to walk. So they had to carry this individual out. And I was there at the time and I know exactly what happened, in the sense that we were in a smoke-filled building. Now, if anybody's ever been in a building full of smoke and you hear about the sort of inhalation of the smoke, it's actually, well, I was going to say disgraceful, it's horrendous. We actually had the foresight to break windows, to put our head through the window to breathe. I've never really been in a situation like that. But once we've managed to save a life, we've managed to prevent other people becoming under any particular harm. We still have our debrief to understand when you go back to the station what we've just done, what's happened, and we're all smelling of smoke. It's an incredible feeling. So yes, we're professional, the officers are professional, they do the job, but as I keep saying, or I've said and I'm repeating myself now, who looks after the professionals? We need to manage their particular issues, and that's where sometimes it can be stressful situations. I'm not a great lover of saying stress. What I would say is we understand how to deal with challenging situations as professional adults doing a job, which goes back to one of the core themes of what I've been saying continually about policing. Our reason for being is to assist the community through all of the endeavours we go through. Sometimes they're because people have difficulties and we just help. Other times it's enforcing the law. Individuals sometimes don't mind us helping. They're not as keen sometimes when we enforce the law. But that's the way policing is, and with my own perspective, that's how I developed leadership, counselling, and a certain amount of management skills, which would hopefully allow me to progress maybe to the next rank, which we could discuss. So if there's other learning involved as an inspector and you take on responsibility for other people, if we're talking in the context of a rank and in a hierarchical structure, what about the other side? Who looks after the inspector? Nobody ever thinks the inspector has the same issues as their staff, right? So I'm married, I've got 3 children and 2 grandchildren now. In fairness, yes, I still have the grandchildren, were obviously very young when I was in the role. So I have to go home at night times, taking everybody else's problems, and that's not a problem in the context, because that's why you aspire and create and move in the rank structure. But I then have to go home and be a husband, a father, a grandfather, and sometimes take on their problems. Now, it's an interesting perspective which I learned from others and from myself, in the context that nobody ever thinks the person who is the leader or manager actually has a different life. The inspector or the manager can never have a bad day. So when I go home and my wife says, "Where have you been?" or "What's happening?" or "I've got to do the shopping," or "This painting needs to be done," or "The grandchildren are having a struggle," or "The children are struggling at home," they're issues all over and above of being a police officer. But then I go back to work the next day after doing all those sort of things, and once again, every day is a daily crisis. We had a situation where we actually had a siege, would you believe, a local place. One of the local residents threatened to blow up a flat. We had a bottle of gas butane, and he was prepared to fire, would you believe, a gun at it to blow up the flame. Now, can you imagine? I've just left my family. my granddaughter's got problems at school. My children are having issues. My wife wants the bin put out. And now I'm in charge of a situation, again, with more than 20 officers at this particular time, managing to talk somebody down from a situation of blowing up a block of flats. And in that context, what you do in the policing set, there's a straightforward side in the context with police negotiators. And we always keep the cells separate. When you've seen it possibly on the television or in some of the scenes where you have the negotiator, we keep the activities of the actual officers who are doing the job and securing the area totally away from the negotiators. And the way I was taught was, commanders command, negotiators negotiate. And that took us over 15 hours to talk this individual out of the house. Now that's a totally different situation to just dealing. But this is the same individual as the inspector, who has a family life and issues at home, has staff to look after, and then has to manage an incident, and hopefully, and this was successfully, to a conclusion over 16 hours. And then you go home. You might have to go to sleep, well, that's reasonable. But then the next day, you're back up again, emptying the bins and taking the children to school. It isn't just all, I was going to say all beer and skittles. It's a localism in the context of understanding the role, managing your home life, managing the role and being professional. These are all skills that you learn as you progress, both in age, maturity, family, and dare I say, within the organisation. And then of course you reflect on some of the things you've done, dare I say, positively and negatively. The world's a funny place when the criminality or the criminals are working. I remember being in a police car and there was you get a sixth sense about these things. And there's a car in front of me, in actual fact, that didn't seem right. So I turned around. Obviously with a police car, you've got the blue lights. I put the blue light on to try and indicate the car to stop. And it was away. And when I say away, it just drove away fast. So you won't know the location I'm talking about, but the bottom line is I'm chasing now a car. For whatever reason, I don't know. But obviously something's not right. It could be a criminal coming home from a burglary, something not right in the car itself, maybe a drunken driver. One thing led to another, and we go towards where a dual carriageway is. So if you can assume the traffic is travelling north, this car went down the slip road and travelled south against the northbound traffic. Now this is where, as a police officer, you kick in, but sometimes you do some stupid things. So I'm now chasing a car down a road against the road traffic. Now it was 2 o'clock in the morning, so fortunately there wasn't a lot of traffic, and my viewpoint was I knew what I was doing, and if I get a car coming the other way, and I don't know how I thought like this, but basically I would put the police car up the verge and turn it over so I didn't have a head-on crash. As it happened, we only went about half a mile before this car went off the slip road, and the driver went down a further road and actually crashed. And one of the strangest things I always remember, the driver, young lad, jumped out with his dog. And the next thing I know, I'm chasing an individual and the dog. Bottom line was, it turned out when I eventually caught him, because I did, it was a stolen car. Now, I'm a dog lover, but the last thing I expected was to be chasing a person who'd stolen a car and had their dog. How does that happen? These are just some of the strange things you come across. I mentioned before about knives and machetes. We went to a situation once where a domestic situation between man and wife, and would you believe a number of murders take place within the family. The wife had stabbed the husband, and as a consequence, I ended up having to put my hand, and we just did these things to stop the bleeding until the ambulance turned up. I managed to save that individual's life. Never expecting that I'd be turning up at work to do something as similar as that. And then the other thing about those it's strange, you could say they're exciting, professional, I'm not quite sure how you describe them. I would say it's how you do the job, but it's amazing. If you're a member of the public, you see a police car. As a police officer, you see an awful lot of life differently. And of course, the other sad thing is, sometimes you're called to situations where people haven't been seen for a long time. I went to a flat locally, and there's a strange thing about where people haven't been seen and people have died alone. And there's something about death where you smell it more than you see it. So as a consequence, once you look through the letterbox, you've got that horrible smell of death. We eventually broke into the flat, and the individual had been lying there for 3 weeks. And I don't know, I don't know whether this is too graphic or not, but can I just say, it's amazing how maggots turn up where there's a dead body. Let's not go into too much more than that. So all of these situations arise within the police service. Now, I'm explaining those are some of the things I did as an inspector and turning up in charge of those situations. But of course, the other one, as I've already maybe related to, is sometimes my younger members of the staff have some potential problems with these issues till we talk them through. And that's what makes, hopefully, the leadership style of the inspector, managing the individuals within their responsibility and the legacy of ensuring they become better police officers for doing their job now, for being better in the future, and turning in tomorrow's potential leaders to carry on the ethos of policing and responsibility and community service.